For many years now, we've heard about how blockchain can revolutionize many industries, many sectors. Well, today we're going to hear about how blockchain can potentially revolutionize the Indian agricultural sector. And what a sector that is. The Indian agricultural sector accounts for something like 14% of India's GDP. And somewhere in the region of 52% of people in India are involved in the agricultural chain. So any revolution that happens to Indian agriculture is likely to have wide-ranging effects. Now, luckily, to guide us through this DIF 2018 session, I've got an expert who's going to tell you about some of the ins and outs and the uses of blockchain technology in Indian agriculture. But before we get to our speaker today, let me say to you, our online audience, welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival 2018. My name is Colin Webster, and I'm one of the DIF team who helps put together the 100 and something sessions that we have over these next 3 weeks. We kicked off last night with our live launch. As I say, around about 100 sessions coming up, covering all sorts of areas, such as blockchain, such as basic income, such as safe and circular materials, all sorts of different ideas we'll be talking about at thinkdiff.co. We're asking you, our online audience, to pitch in and help us out whenever we broadcast any of these sessions. So please put your questions and comments into the window you're watching this on, and we will put them to our speaker in today's session. Or you can use Twitter's #ThinkDiff. But back to India and the use of blockchain in agriculture. Our speaker today is Neeraj Monga, who is a global practice leader in blockchain. He's excited about various different technologies such as artificial intelligence and their practical applications, and particularly the practical applications in agriculture. And as I said, agriculture is a huge industry for India. But first, to blockchain, an idea that many of us have heard of, but perhaps not many of us know exactly how it works. So Neeraj is up for a challenge today. He's up for a challenge of telling us exactly what blockchain is so that we can all get onto the same page as him. Neeraj, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, and hello to all the global audience watching us live. It's really exciting to be one of the keynote speakers for DIF, and I really want to talk about the innovation blockchain has brought to today's society. And I'm sure you must have heard a lot of noise about blockchain, what it can bring impact to financial services, supply chain, healthcare, etc. But today I'm going to talk about the key aspects of how it can bring an impact in agriculture. One of the most core aspects. Food is very important to all of our lives and culture, and various aspects around food safety and procurement have been talked about, but nobody's really solved it. So let's go step by step in our journey of what we have done and what India is doing to solve this problem and bring forth, and disrupt the traditional way of how agriculture was done and viewed. To start with, I'll talk about the technology. You must have heard about the concept called Bitcoin, and blockchain is the underlying technology behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ripple. So unlike physical currency, digital cash, and cryptocurrencies, they come with a real problem called double spending. So to explain, if I send you something digitally, I may send you a copy and not my original picture. So Bitcoin solved this problem where you could send copies of the same Bitcoin in different transaction, and it could solve the problem of double spending. So blockchain technology helps us counter such issues. So a simplest way to think of blockchain is look at a large distributed ledger of sorts that stores records of transaction. This ledger is replicated hundreds of times throughout the public network so that it's available to everyone. Each time any transaction occurs, it is replicated across the ledger so that everyone can see it. So in a traditional way, how it works is that you have a centralized ledger. However, in blockchain, if I see it, you see a centralized ledger, which is a traditional way of how banks work. So whenever you want to make a payment, the bank authenticates that transaction. It goes back to you. So every time you have to be dependent on this central sort of organization for every transaction. However, in blockchain or Bitcoin as such, you don't have a centralized agency. So every transaction is carried out by nodes, and there is a ledger maintained at every node. So there are key advantages about it. So you don't have any dependencies. So of the central system, so your transaction costs go down. And secondly, in our system, if you talk about, everyone has a ledger so that there is no tampering as such. So you can actually make a transaction and nobody can tamper it. Um, if someone wants to hack the system, one has to change all the nodes, which is virtually impossible and requires a lot of computation powers. So every time a new transaction is initiated, a block is created within the transaction to broadcast to every node. So each block carries a timestamp and a reference of the previous block in the chain, so that the chain is maintained and it records the events. And every transaction is authenticated by all the other nodes in the chain. So whenever you try to make any transaction, all the nodes would have to update in their ledger. So this way, data is saved, and there cannot be any tampering because everyone has the detail of transaction. There is transparency, there is security because you can share, and this results in an ecosystem where you can solve various issues because there is trust and transparency in the system. In the context of security, um, immutability in computer science refers to something that cannot be changed. So once the data has been written to a blockchain, it virtually becomes immutable, and it it evolves into a new alternative implementation. Blockchain technology can be applied not just to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but to any asset that needs to be stored, distributed, or transacted. So it could be your property records, music, insurance, physical goods, assets, and even your data. Traditionally, all this innovative technology has been confused by mindless terminologies like hashing, cryptocurrencies, mining. But to put it simply, any transaction between you and I can happen. I'll be a one node and you'll be another node. And if we were to do a transaction, we'll both have a ledger at our own systems. I'll maintain a copy of whatever I give to you, and you'll maintain a copy of whatever you give me. And throughout the node, everyone will maintain this transaction. So to just put it very simply, it's like a peer-to-peer network of sort without any central agency, right? Um, Moving further, I'd like to talk about this technology having great implementations across sectors. So a lot of people talk about financial services, but one of the biggest uses of blockchain is identity management and proof of work. You can actually trace the origin of how transaction has happened. Um, I'll probably use the example of me transferring money across the system. So let's say there are a bunch of 5 friends, and you owe money to one. So all of the other 4 friends would have a record maintained in their ledger that you owe money, and every time you give that money to them, they will update that throughout their 5-person system. And if I kind of do any other transaction, I borrow money or lend money to all those 5 people, um, the transaction would have to be authenticated by all the other friends. This would result in transparency, and you can also maintain a ledger of when that transaction happened, how that happened. And if I want to trace to an origin of any aspect, I can easily go back to any person's ledger and go and trace to its origin. So this gives me a power of immutability, and I can apply it across industries I earlier mentioned. Um, so this is a basic concept of agriculture. I'm sorry, blockchain, and I'll be happy if there is any concept more on the concept as such, before I switch gears to agriculture and then really talk about how the intervention of this technology can help in agriculture.
So I guess what you're saying then, Monga, is that the advantage that blockchain gives us is that there's more efficiency in the system because you don't have to go to a centralized location to transfer data, and then that location transfers data out of there. And secondly, there's there's a security aspect, because every single transaction that happens that's within the blockchain is monitored, is tagged as processed, and nobody can alter any transaction that's made. That's the security aspect, isn't it?
Definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, it's called decentralization aspect. We don't have a central bank. What makes it appealing is that it is impervious to any sort of corruption, tampering, or censorship, because it's a peer-to-peer network. Copies of ledger are stored across locations. So one can't really destroy it, and every node is independent. So this really gives an aspect of keeping a record of all the data exchanges, using a peer-to-peer network, and data not being altered.
That's wonderful, and I mean that whole transparency and that security aspect, as I think you're going to tell us about about soon, excuse me, can actually be revolutionary to many industries, particularly where you're talking about small farm holders who want to keep track of their goods and so on. I don't want to spoil things for those who are watching, because I know you actually want to tell us a bit of some of the problems in agriculture in India first before you go into the application.
Sure. And thank you for that. And I think you mentioned key facts in the initial part of our discussion, and I'll just repeat them out for our audience here. So Indian agriculture, contributes around 14% to the GDP. It contributes around 8% of the global agriculture output. It provides food to 1.25 billion people domestically, and also exports, I think, around another 700 million. It provides sustainability and income to about 60% of the population, so around 1.2 billion people and 60%. You can imagine how much agriculture is important. Currently, like 52% of the people are directly involved in agriculture, and I'm not talking about indirect, like transportation, etc., storage people. The state of Indian farmers are, they have to work day and night to cultivate group crops, but most of them don't really make a lot of money. And this is true not just for India, but a lot of farmers across the globe. And they deal with various financial distresses. Most of them are triggered by unfavorable climatic conditions. So it could be erratic weather, inadequate rainfall, etc., and decreased size of landholding, unsatisfactory realization of prices, inadequate storage facilities, etc., etc. Um, so there are various issues which are controllable and not controllable. But to have a better agriculture system, you need to have better quality and cheaper inputs, better predictability of weather information, eliminate middlemen, and improve farmer profitability by providing credits, etc. So every time you hear blockchain, you automatically talk about cryptocurrencies. But indeed, cryptocurrency is one of the common usage. But blockchain has a lot to offer rather than just virtual currencies. It can transform. So when you talk about distributed ledger, it just talks about one DLT on the cloud. So you could all these features are possible to solve for various networks like farmers, consumers, retailers to be on the network. Um, there are various aspects, and I'm going to talk about a very broad level of various uses of how blockchain can be used in agriculture industry, and then talk about a use case of what we are doing in India with the Planning Commission of India to solve the problem of certification. So you could use farmers' data to share across what sort of farming practices, best practices are there, what is happening in a crop, also predict weather conditions in neighboring farm. You could store all the seed quality data, moisture data, climate data, harvest and yield data, and draw analytics about how it can be used. Farmers can get instant data related to the seed quality, climate data, etc. It can empower small farmers to reach out to the market. So you don't need a middleman sort of a way. So it could be a peer-to-peer node where a retailer, a big retailer like Walmart, wants to procure groceries. It can easily do that. It can also you can also track the origins. So in terms of organic farming, if a consumer is really concerned from which farm my produce came, you can just scan a QR code and it will show the proof of origin. And this QR code data cannot be tamper-proof, and tamper-proofing is provided by the underlying technology, which is blockchain. And
can you help us out here? So you said, you gave us an example of maybe Walmart wants to buy a particular product. So at the moment, I guess Walmart goes to the middleman and procures that product, and that product would come from various different farms who of various sizes who are producing.
Definitely.
So how does blockchain change that process?
Exactly. So that's a very good question, and I'll give you an example of online e-commerce is a marketplace where anybody can sell anything, and there is a interlinking of customers and buyers in a marketplace. So blockchain facilitates this really easily because every customer, every buyer, every supply chain person is on that node for a transaction. And you have a concept called smart contracts, which it is facilitated. So, by a machine. So I have a node as a farmer, and Walmart has a node as a procurement person. There'll be a smart contract generated over the blockchain, and it is verified across the node. So that smart contract would enable me to supply to uh, Walmart, and the moment that transaction is completed, I would also get an automated invoice and get money. Whereas in a current system, how it works is a lot of manual intervention is required, and there is a lot of trust that needs to be built. With blockchain, you can have an open system of sorts. So currently, Walmart or any other grocery retailer has its own chain. They have to rely on its own chain. So right from the farmer, they will partner with the farmer, they will partner with the middleman, they will partner with the transport guy who would ensure that it reaches a central warehouse, and through the warehouses they would do some planning and put it across each store for groceries. Right, it is a time consuming and costly process, and it's a closed system. So a farmer would only sell to one particular retailer, and it cannot participate in other sort of way. Whereas, how this facilitates a closed system, so Walmart controls the prices, etc. But farmers are left to the mercy of how much they want to procure, etc. And they can't really. A consumer really doesn't see where my produce comes from. But in an open system, all of them can come together as nodes, and with the concept of smart contracts, they can buy and sell, and they can also leverage services of supply chain. So all of them come together in an ecosystem. And why would they come that? Because there is a trust that blockchain enables, and there is a transparency involved, and there are also concept of interlinking of data, sharing of data, and even smart contracts, which facilitates that a particular thing would be delivered on time, and whenever it's delivered, it is validated across the ledgers of each node, and thus a retailer gets benefits, a consumer gets benefit, and even the farmer gets benefit to work in this marketplace model. So anyone can come. In a closed supply system, not a small farmer can't really participate, but in this system, it also facilitates every node to have that sort of system. And not just supply chain or procurement, it's also about weather data, certification standards, improving food safety. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the next section, what we are actually doing in those aspects. So food safety is one of the areas with a lot of tech companies and even organization of the work for. So bringing transparency to the supply chain as well as the product journey allows us to identify and remove bad actors and processes. So ideal conditions from farm to market we can pinpoint and improve. And with respect to food safety, one can also, provide a tamper-proof data. What sort of pesticides are used? What sort of soil quality is it? What are the weather conditions? So that you have good organic produce, which also bring forth a healthier society for us by using, all this tamper-proof information. The second is, as we already talked about, traceability, which is one of the use cases. Transaction costs. So in a case of working in agriculture supply chain, depending on counterparty, you must trust them. So company like with the digital firms, they're creating this ecosystem where it's automated, and thus each transaction cost of procurement, supply, etc. is reduced by the intervention of new markets. So opening new markets, I'm talking about where you get access to global information and improving logistics. I'll just quickly shift gears and talk about a key problem what we're trying to solve.
Just as
Is that
you're preparing that, Monga, let me just remind the online audience that they can chip in with their thoughts and their questions, and maybe their case
sure.
examples of blockchain being used in agriculture. We'd love to hear that. Use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter, or post comments in the page you're watching this on ThinkDiff, or somewhere else. We'll find them. I've got a guy sitting next to me who'll sniff out your questions wherever you put them. So pop your questions in and we'll put them to Monga as time goes on. Sorry, I interrupted your flow there a little bit. Back to you.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you. And for the online audience, just giving a context. So this is the current system of agriculture that looks, in terms of there is a lack of interoperability across multiple certification standards. And what blockchain does is actually solve this by intervention of technology. You have the PGS Organic, India Organic, which is part of the global PGS system, which everyone uses. And there is a third party. Now, all of this requires a lot of manual intervention. With the automated system, you can actually uh, directly go from the farm, track the origin to harvesting, carrier, warehouse, retail store, and finally the consumer, because you have smart contracts at each node. So all of this, what I'm trying to say explain, is a farming, harvesting, carrier, warehouse is a node, and every step you would have a distributed ledger which will capture this information using smart contracts and put that across the system. So whenever there is tampering at the farm level, at a harvesting level, at a carrier level, you can track it and know if there is a tampering done. And that could solve the problem of, let's say, delays or any particular adulteration. uh, and that really gives everyone, a sort of benefit, that you have a system where you introduce uh, IoT sensors on top of a layer and give everyone a benefit of better produce, better quality, and better management. I'll just quickly introduce a concept and bring forth for the audience to put their minds of a farm as a ledger, right? You have a farm which is used to do a lot of activities, and the lot of activities are, irrigation, putting
Are you there, Monga? We've lost Monga's voice for a second there. Yep, I think he's still online. But sometimes this happens, folks. It's a live online festival, and perhaps Monga's internet connection has dropped a little bit there. He was about to go into a case study, it looked like, of exactly how blockchain can be used on a farm. Personally, I found that example, the images he showed us of the nodal step-by-step process, really helped bring to life to me the applications of blockchain and the way in which farmers can track where their goods end up, and any tamperings, as Monga was putting it, that might take place within that system. So blockchain helps to rebuild the trust, is what I'm taking away from what he's been telling us so far. And from the consumer side, of course, consumers can trace exactly where the goods come from. And that's particularly important when you're dealing with aspects like fair wages or organic farm, of which there's something like 800,000 organic farmers in India. So I can see how blockchain can be used. Its application can be really beneficial to both the producer and the consumer. Maybe not so good for the middleman. But I just wonder if Monga has joined us again. Nope, in fact, he's literally just disappeared off the Hangout. So as I say, these things happen in live broadcasting, and it looks like he's trying to connect us once again now. In fact, I can hear that he's back on the game. Monga, you've joined us.
Thank you. I guess there was a brief technology error, and that's what I wanted to say, that technology can only solve problems until a limit. And that's why I need to have a concept of farm as a ledger.
Is this you on your mobile phone now?
Actually, I just kind of put on my mobile phone. I think there is some Hangout connectivity issues. But anyways, I'll just quickly show the guys a presentation on my phone and really help us to talk about the concept of farm as a ledger.
Yeah, I believe I was sorry. Yeah, on you go, Monga.
Yeah, so the farm as a ledger concept really helps to register and connect at every level. How that helps is that every transaction is recorded and stored on a distributed ledger. So irrigation, soil, crops, even any activity, and that goes on throughout the system for from, let's say, taking from the farm to the supplier to the consumer. And you can put IoT sensors to record data, and these could be, let's say how long the tractor is used, or how long how long irrigation is done. And you can have automated certification standards. So by monitoring that activity, you could have like a concept called automated organic certificates, by what is the quantity of fertilizer you've used, what is the quantity of soil quality, etc., which a sensor can match. And that could be put on a ledger. which cannot be tampered by the farmer or the retailer or the supplier who has benefited. And thus, throughout this chain, you could have put this information in a distributed ledger, which a retailer like Walmart can see, a consumer like me can see, and this can be applied in any concept. So you could also apply that in meat, for that matter. You want to see when that meat produced was put, when it went through the cold supply chain, was it tampered or not, was the temperature right, is it fresh, how long can it use it, and nobody can tamper that. You could also use in beverages, where was the source of water. You could also use in wine. So if you buy a very expensive bottle of wine, from the produce to the supplier, was it at the right temperature? And even manufacturers have an incentive to use this, because then they would, be able to see whether, a distributor or transporter, kind of put anything, or there was any tampering as such.
Monga, here's the thing. I've never quite understood this application of blockchain on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you're helping persuade me a little bit by talking about the sort of quality control nature of the wine, the meat, whatever it happens to be, whilst it's on the farm and as it gets transferred. But I guess the aspect I struggle with a little bit is how blockchain can be used to help us with recording weather data, soil quality, seed quality. Surely that's you said IoT, Internet of Things use rather than a blockchain use. Why would blockchain be used on the farm to monitor these things?
Definitely, and that's a very good point that you made. Right now is that IoT sensors can record data, but when they are put on a system, in a digital system, it is open to tampering or exchange of data. And as a manufacturer, I can put human intervention and try to leverage this to my control. But when I put it, most systems are centrally put. So to put for the first image that I show, and I'll just quickly shift gears and show that image where we talk about a central system versus a distributed system. When I use this IoT in a central system, there is a lot of mistrust or information exchange that can happen without the control. Whereas in a blockchain, all of that is put in a distributed ledger. So when you use IoT sensors, you can easily, as a farmer, you can control the data that is put out, when it was produced, whether it was organic or not. A transporter can tamper with the temperature of a produce. So when I'm transporting wine or meat, I can, fudge it. But in a blockchain, that data is produced, so put across each node on a distributed ledger. So there will be information when the farmer produced it and when the transporter got it, when it was distributed, and also other aspects like monitoring of soil quality, which is captured by the sensor, but also the certification agency. So there can be no corruption, no bribery, because it's put on a distributed ledger. So anyone who tries to enforce corruption by changing data and giving an organic certificate cannot do that, because all of the data is not able to tamper.
Okay, that's a little bit clearer for me. Thanks for that explanation. So you've told us about how we can trace goods as they move through the system, and this is good for the farmer, this is good for the consumer. And actually, when you dropped out for a minute there, I did say to the audience, I just wonder about the poor old middleman who seems to be getting a bit of a kicking here. We don't seem to trust this middleman. What's the middleman going to do in this blockchain-enabled future?
Definitely, that's a good point. And a lot of people talk about that, the economic impact, and this is something we talk about even in automation and AI. What will we humans do if we automate the systems? But to put forth an example, there are a lot of opportunities for people. So for example, in organic produce, when you produce something organic, you get better prices, and that better prices are replicated across the system. So farmer gets a margin, the transporter gets a margin of that, and even a retailer can sell better prices. So it is definitely a top line enabler. So there is a direct economic impact. There is also societal impact, because you have better quality of produce and safer quality of produce. That would not only just give better impact economically, but also on a societal level where you have that. So While in this value chain, you're right, middlemen would see a lot of constraint on their costs, but I think there is a lot of other opportunities also where they can participate in a marketplace model, establish relationship with small farmers, also new economic opportunities across, mining of that data, which bring forth new set of, jobs for the people. Rather than the standardization jobs of agriculture, you could have mapping of agriculture data, mining that, sharing information, sharing best qualities, which are actually put across the system. So I feel like with the intervention of these modern technologies, there would be more job opportunities or offerings for a lot of people.
Okay, thank you very much. Monga, I believe we've got some questions that are working their way through the system. My co-worker here, Bledar, is pressing all of the buttons on his machine at once. And are they electronically flying over here, Bledar? Here it comes. Great. Emma Hamilton Foster has asked, can you please explain what a smart contract is in relevance to the relationship with blockchain?
Definitely. That's a very good question, Emma. And to explain smart contract, I'll go to a very classic example of, let's say, money transaction. So if I take money from you, there is a verbal incentive. So I take a loan from you of £100, and in a system you may note it down on your notepad or put a message to me, and then I have to owe you back in 5 days. So that's a contract that is established based on a system, but there is no intervention. So if I don't pay back, there is no one to hold accountable to me. It's only based on our trust, and in the future our trust will be broken. Right now in blockchain, I'd like to explain that if I break a trust to someone, that will be recorded across the system, and next time if I go out, all of the nodes would know that this person broke a trust. So that is one aspect. And in case of smart contracts, it's like a machine to machine concept, so M to M. I, as a supplier or a manufacturer of produce, want to have a contract with Walmart. So the two nodes or two machines would set up a contract, and I would have to work according to a contract which says that when an item A is delivered to B, which is the retailer, if I do that, an invoice is generated, I would be paid. And that is the concept called tokenization. So automatically I can actually generate invoices and the payment is made. Now in a current system, in any transaction, in financial transaction or any business transaction, whenever I supply something, I have to go to a manual contract, read that, and whenever I fulfill that, I raise an invoice. So the finance team of one company, interacts with the other company. In a automated or smart contract model, how that works is that immediately the payments are settled. The machine recognizes that transaction has happened, and the money is given to the person supplying produce or doing any service. So this can be put forth not only in agriculture but also in other formats, like services. So if you provide any service to one person, and immediately once the payments are settled, so the machine enables that, and that's how the trust is enabled.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions have come in, and we're nearly reaching the end of this DIF on-air session. A couple of questions around tampering. How would you know if there's tampering? Asks Irina, and Nidhi says tampering. I guess the point is surely it's still possible. Let me phrase that question for you. I want to know if I produce a kilo of apples and I enter into the blockchain 1 kilo of apples and I send it to you, what's to stop you saying no, it was half a kilo?
That is definitely true. So with the intervention, so that's where we use IoT sensors also. So you would manually put that data, but also IoT sensor would actually acknowledge that 1 kilo, and thus there are two different nodes who are acknowledging that transaction. And I'll talk about in general how blockchain can prevent tampering. So if I were to tamper a node, I would have to tamper all the nodes. So at every node, the information is maintained. So when you say that I transported 1 kilo of apples to me, it is put forth on each of the nodes across the system who are participating in this marketplace model. It could be customers, suppliers, other agents, government bodies.
Well, so the truth, Monga, if you're not telling the truth, it's not really a kilo. You're pulling my leg here. Who's verifying this, Kilo?
Definitely. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. So to bring forth the concept of how blockchain can solve tampering, right? Because every node, and I'm just not talking about Kilo Apple, but let's say any transaction that happens. So I borrow money from you. I can't tamper that, I didn't borrow £100, I only borrowed 80, because every other node in that participating blockchain or chain as such would have updated this transaction that this transaction occurred. So whenever I want to, tamper with it, I have to not only tamper my node, but all the nodes in the system, which is computationally large, which would take a lot of time. And thus, this brings a concept of tamper-proofing. Now, in case of manual interventions, right, like weighing a good or entering data, there is still like a little bit of manual intervention that is involved, and thus, as a human, you can actually put that. And thus, as I think I can see, Anna saying that it is not a magic bullet. So that sort of manual intervention can be solved by putting sensors and machines which are acknowledging, yes, this, when I put a produce and I load it on a truck, there is an I2 sensor which measures the weight, and the supplier takes an image which can manually see that there are apples, and the sensor acknowledge that. So you would not just need blockchain, but the intervention of other technologies like AI, cloud, etc., put forward in an ecosystem where there is a lot of manual requirement required.
I want to ask one final question, and it's coming from Eric from Denmark. Thanks for putting in your question, Eric. And it's a point about who leads the change. And actually, I want to rephrase this a little bit and say, to what extent is blockchain currently being used in Indian agriculture, and how does it scale up so this becomes the thing? Yes,
that's a good question. And I'll also answer Eric's question because he wants to ask probably who leads the chain. So in the current ecosystem, there are two stakeholders: the government, the planning commission, and retailers. And they both have different motives. So for the government, they really want to push for every farmer on a ledger, on a digital system, so that they can monitor what crop is being produced and better quality of crops. For the retailer, they want to get better prices for the produce and show the consumers that they can trace the origin. Bring forth an ecosystem where people can track and organic produce is being sold. For leading a change in the system, in the current Indian ecosystem, retailers are leading the initiative, and they would be one of driving the change, because it's for the likes of Walmart, Spencer's, Big Bazaars, or Nature Basket in India, who want to sell organic produce and also want to show that their customers that yes, this is organic, and they have their trust by putting forth a decentralized ledger where they can not only control the ecosystem but also show to the customers that yes, this is how the produce was made.
Monga, thank you very much. This has been a 38-minute session looking at how blockchain can be used in Indian agriculture. And our global practice leader in blockchain, Neeraj Monga, joined us and told us, number one, what blockchain is, and number two, more importantly, how it can be applied and why it should be applied in the Indian agricultural sector. It sounds like it absolutely could help smallholder farmers, could help. Well, every step along that process is what I took away from this session. It's about transparency, it's about efficiency, it's about trust. Neeraj, thank you so much for joining us in this DIF 2018 session. This is the second day of a 3-week-long online festival hosted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the Disruptive Innovation Festival team. There are over 100 sessions to watch at thinkdiff.co. There are live interactive sessions like this. There are also pre-produced videos, really high-quality videos and podcasts coming up at the Disruptive Innovation Festival this year on a whole range of different topics. And they're coming in from all around the world, as today's session helped to demonstrate, I hope. So thank you very much for watching. Check out the schedule at thinkdiff.co. There's something there for you. There's something there for everybody. And until next time, I'm going to say it's goodbye for now. Cheerio.